The information provided on Terminal Addiction Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified provider with any questions you might have regarding medical or mental health condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, the hosts, are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization or institutions. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we make no guarantee regarding the completeness, reliability, or applicability of the content discussed. Listening to this podcast does not establish provider-patient relationship. If you're experiencing a medical emergency or mental health crisis, please contact emergency services or crisis line immediately.
All right, and we are back with another episode of the Terminal Addiction Podcast. My name is Doug A.
And I'm Paul B. And we are back in the upper Doghouse studio.
It's kind of nice to be home.
Yeah, we took a little break and went to a different location for our last two episodes, and we're back.
Yeah, and I enjoyed, the change of location, but so I'm comfortable about up here, so.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today, Paul?
Well, we kind of hinted at it in a previous episode that I was getting ready to have surgery.
And you have had since surgery?
I have had surgery, and even without, like kratom and heroin and all those fun things, I made it through surgery, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that happened.
So yeah, you and I talk pretty often, and so I'm kind of caught up. But explain to the listeners what was going on, what happened, like why you had to have surgery.
So I had a pinched nerve in my elbow.
Ouch.
And being a nurse, I kind of knew what to expect. And I've got this nice 2.5-inch long incision in the back of my arm. But I was able to make it through it. So it took a lot of planning. I've had a couple procedures done since I went into treatment, but the more times I do it, the better I get at communicating to the entire team what I need. And, one of the people from anesthesia actually didn't like my idea, and we had a discussion about it. But in the long run, it was my body, and so I had to tell him what I needed. And one of the keys was, for me, I knew that I couldn't have ketamine. And I know there's a lot of talk about ketamine, using it for different things, but I've had a previous experience with ketamine, and I liked it a little bit too much. So when anesthesia came in, I said, I've only got one request, and that's that I get no ketamine. And they said, well, then you're going to be getting more narcotics. I said, My weakness is actually the ketamine, not the narcotics.
So for those of you that aren't hip to a lot of the drugs, ketamine is sort of a dissociative. Yes. It's used a lot, I think, as an animal tranquilizer.
Yeah, it was used originally so that they could do surgery on, for instance, horses while they were wide awake, and so we used it a lot in children because you can put a bone back in place while they're awake and not have to give them too much sedation. And the idea that anesthesia had was, well, if I'm not quite so much out of it, then, they won't have to give me as many narcotics during procedure for the, to keep me asleep.
Yeah, and it's not a very long acting, so it's nice for what you were talking about, or quick outpatient surgeries, but. It's definitely one of those that has some controversy. I know there's some talk out there about people using it for therapy purposes. Mm-hmm. But again, that's not just a bunch of hippies hanging out in a parking lot. That's probably more of a monitored, treatment with professionals in the same.
Yeah, and it certainly shows some promise in things like PTSD and major depression. But again, it was one of those drugs that I had a bad experience with. Being very upfront with the surgery team that I was a recovering addict, I did have a little surprise, and that was when I got back into the operating room. I was waiting for, to start getting sleepy, and I was having this conversation with one of the nurses there, and I remember him saying, "Oh, but you're not going to remember any of this." And I'm thinking, yes, I will. And then the next conversation I had was with the anesthesia provider, and he said, "Oh, you're going to feel a little warmth in your arm." And I'm thinking, bullshit. No, I am going to feel pain shooting up from my IV site up to my shoulder. And that's the last thing I remember was the pain as it hit my shoulder.
So with any medical procedures, dental or surgery or anything, we just want to remind people that it is a great idea to talk to your providers, let them know where you're at in your recovery. And if you have access to, somebody that is knowledgeable about this kind of stuff, to bring them in. If you have a doctor who understands addiction, linking them up with your, surgical team or anesthesia team, so that they can make sure that you're getting what you need and not getting what you don't want. So what was the actual anesthesia like? How was the product? How was the pain? How was, the feelings, all that kind of stuff?
So they used something called propofol, sometimes known in the medical profession as milk of amnesia. You go to sleep very quickly. You wake up very quickly. There's no lingering side effects from it. I did get a small amount of narcotics during procedure. I don't remember any of that. But when I woke up very quickly and got nothing other than Tylenol. But I had already set up that I was going to have a gatekeeper that kept any medications, narcotics that I was going to be getting. Fortunately, I did not need any narcotics. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't, I practiced a lot of meditation. I was able to relax enough that I really haven't had any pain at all since the surgery, even though I've got a big ugly scar on the back of my arm. I've not taken anything harder than an Ibuprofen, and that's once a day that I've been taking those. Certainly everyone's experience is a little different. I have, like I said, I have had a couple procedures previous. Going to sleep with propofol is a little different. You do fall asleep very, very quickly versus just kind of forgetting everything. But my experience actually was actually pretty decent in going to sleep and waking up. So, I didn't have to stick around the recovery room very long because I did wake up so quickly.
That's good to hear. And again, for those of you that might be, not hip to a lot of the medications, who was it that passed away from the propofol? Wasn't there a famous musician?
Yeah. Actually, Michael Jackson
that's right.
died from propofol.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he had a doctor with him, 24 hours a day administering this stuff, but it's still, nothing to be messed around with.
No, absolutely. And, like I said, I think it was in the last episode, maybe the one before that, there's been many people that have overdosed from things that they were given by doctors. Prince is another one that overdosed from medications given to him by a doctor. And he was one that didn't drink, didn't use any illicit drugs, but just the medications that he got, from the doctor did it.
Yeah, so I'm glad you made it through the surgery. You reached out to me, I think that same day.
Yeah.
And I was kind of honestly a little surprised to hear from you. I thought you were going to be, taking a day to rest, recuperate, but you sounded great on the phone when we talked and kind of told me the whole spiel about what you experienced. And I'm just happy you made it through, in one piece minus a scar.
Yeah, I was actually underneath. I don't think my surgeon would like to hear this, but I was underneath the kitchen sink replacing a faucet the day after surgery. I felt good, and part of that was my own mental preparation for the procedure.
That's good. Yeah, the idea that, and you talked about it, practicing meditation just as part of our daily lives. I have found that it is a very useful and helpful tool for, an infinite number of things. Kind of brings me back to the present moment. controlled breathing. I can, be on the exercise bike at the gym and, grab onto the little metal, heart rate and blood pressure monitors. And I can watch my pulse rate go down, while I'm pedaling. I can watch it come down, 6, 8, 10, 12 points, on the pulse rate. So I know that it is a valuable tool. And especially for people in early recovery, so for a lot of people, it's a pretty foreign concept.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways to meditate. I don't know that it is a subject that's brought up often enough. I think meditation, prayer, spirituality seems to be a pretty private thing. But I think it's really important to talk about this stuff with your support network. If you're a member of like a 12-step group, bringing that up as a topic, and especially if you're new, picking the brains of the people that have been there for a while, seeing what they do to pray and meditate. Because I think a lot of people come in and they just don't know, and they see it and they don't know what to do with it. So I'm curious what your meditations look like as well.
So I do it every evening, and since I'm not working this week, I've been doing it throughout the day as well. And I don't want to discount the idea of medication. I have some medical issues myself where I have medications that I have to take. But the idea of using other things to help with pain isn't a new concept. It goes back literally centuries, with different cultures. And, we find that there's a lot of things that we can do as far as pain management that don't require medication. I wear a T-shirt. My wife hates it. I wear it sometimes when I'm teaching, and it says educated drug dealer on it. Our industry is based on the idea of, well, if you've got something, we need to give you a pill for it. And that may be the wrong way of looking at things. Certainly in my past, I would have turned to the drugs quickly to take care of that little pain I had. But, things like massage, things like heat and cold really do a lot for, helping with the pain.
Yeah, and meditation, just to touch on that again, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I spent like 6 weeks over in the country of India. About 12 years ago, I went with a friend of mine who was my sponsor at the time. And he goes over there, regularly a couple times a year. And so I just tagged along. And while I was over there, I was a recovering Catholic in a Hindu country, in a Buddhist pocket of that Hindu country. And I made friends with Muslims. And so I got to pick the brains of a lot of people. I did like a little 2-day 3-day silent meditation retreat, which at the time was a lot. It was heavy. There was no talking during the retreat. There was a few minutes to kind of download some of your stuff with one of the supervisors, but it was different. It was very different. So some people really lean into the silent meditation. Some people are really big on like the smells and bells, and I've got singing bowls, and I've got incense, and I've got, candles, and I can go that way with it too. Some people include music, usually music without words, just so that you're able to just focus on meditating. But then you can just, go sit down on a park bench for a little while and just be part of, the world around you. And I think there's just a lot of different avenues for meditation. A lot of people like a guided meditation. YouTube has a lot of really good stuff under guided meditation, and it's another person's voice kind of setting a scene and walking you through things. And it really does, it helps a lot of people. And I know my meditation is becoming more and more just like in the moment. It's usually a pretty quick 5 or 10 minutes where I separate myself from whatever is going on. I find a nice quiet place, and I just focus on being instead of doing, because I think we get so wrapped up in doing all that stuff all the time. It's important to remember to just be.
I was a brand new nurse. This is going back 25 years ago, but I was a brand new nurse, and I was working in an oncology unit, and I had a patient in oncology that was doing a lot of the things that we're talking about right now. The sense, smells, using our other senses to help with their cancer diagnosis. And at one point, I went to the oncology doctor there, and I asked him, I said, is all this stuff safe for this patient that was very sick? And he looked at me very stern, and he said, the stuff that we're giving her is killing her. But the stuff that she's doing, at very worst, isn't hurting her. And that was a big lesson for me, in my career. Sometimes, we don't know everything about medicine. We don't know everything about spirituality or any of those things. And we can learn from each other.
Yeah, I've also got a friend who is an avid golfer, and he likes to walk the courses. So he's got his bag, and I think he carries or has it on wheels. And so he'll kind of meditate as he's walking, kind of a moving meditation. I know a couple people in this area who are in 12-step programs like to go out and go hiking. Some people tell me that just going fishing is another meditative activity. I really just I encourage people to try things, give it a fair shake. Ask people, in your recovery worlds, what they do to meditate. Google has a lot of really good stuff as well. So just trying some things, and not just trying it once or twice, but actually giving this a real shot and giving it a try and finding what works for you. Because what Paul and I have been talking about works for us, but we understand that everybody's on their own recovery journey, and that what they do is going to need to work for them.
Yeah, I go fly fishing a couple times a year, and it's not so much for catching fish. It's just to get outside of myself and just kind of relax. I'm also a drone pilot, and a lot of times I'll just take my drones out in the field someplace, fly around for a while, just seeing the world from a different perspective gives me a whole new perspective on life. And there's things to be learned from everything. I can see myself as a bird just flying over the crowd and going through fields and flying through the sky. And it's kind of a neat way of experiencing life.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's something I've seen some of your footage, and it's just really cool. And I can imagine that just being out there by yourself or maybe with another person, just getting a different perspective on the world. I think a lot of times we get so wrapped up in our, single perception that I think it's important to zoom out and look at the big picture, and doing something with like a drone, you're literally zooming out and seeing things from a different perspective. I know I've heard astronauts who, when they get up there and they see, the size and the mass of the Earth, and then they also see the vastness of space. A lot of times I've heard those guys talk about that being a spiritual experience.
Sure.
Reframes their view on everything. So yeah, just being able to take a step back and zoom out and see the picture from a wider perspective, getting other people's inputs, I think really helps, shine some light on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we all have something to learn from every experience in life. And, I start off my Saturday morning meetings with going around the room and asking everyone their gratitudes.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because, I'll have a group of 40 people there. Everyone has their own gratitude for the day. And it's rare that two people will have the same gratitude. Sometimes it's going to be that your favorite team is playing that afternoon, or it may be because the sun's shining. It may be because, you have a family member that's doing well. Everyone has their own idea of what, that gratitude is.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate enough at the treatment facility where I work as a counselor. I get to do a wide variety of lectures. There's probably 25 different lectures that I can give at a moment's notice. But one of them that I really enjoy doing is a gratitude lecture. And I get to do that with one of our chaplains who has actually become a really good friend of mine. And so he and I get to tag team this lecture. It's one of the only, I think, lectures that we do at our facility that has two presenters. And so we've learned over the year and a half we've been doing it, how to play off of each other. And a lot of times that gratitude lecture comes around at the right time, not for the patients, but for me. And it's really good to get in there and talk about this stuff and, educate people and teach them, what gratitude is, because I think that's a word that's been co-opted a lot by, influencers, and it's just a popular word to say is gratitude. Oh, I'm grateful. It's about, I think it's about the action. That's one of the things that we teach the patients at our facility is it's about the action. It's not just, saying thank you or, saying, you're grateful. It's about what are you doing to show that gratitude? What are you doing to show that thanks? And, we talk about that, and then we go around the room and we have the patients, each one of them tell us 3 things they're grateful for. And it's so cool because, very, very, very rarely is it a material thing. Mm-hmm. And if it is, there's usually a sentimental attachment to it. I remember we had a guy that was grateful for his car, and then when it was like, oh, okay, but that car allows him to get to meetings. Yeah. That car, he works on that car himself in his garage. So being out there wrenching on a car for him is a spiritual activity. So I don't hear people talk about being grateful for money or being grateful for things or stuff. Typically, it's people being thankful for the opportunity to get clean and sober. Grateful for their family and friends, grateful for, the education that they're receiving. And so it's very, very rarely, if ever, just a material thing that is just a thing. So it's really cool. And I think gratitude is a big part. And so meditation has actually become, part of my gratitude. While I'm in that silent state, a lot of times I gain some insight. Sometimes I get answers. Sometimes I get just a thought that comes into my head that I would not have gotten, otherwise if I had just been caught up in the hustle bustle. But just by being still for a while, I get a lot of insight. And so I'm very grateful for that insight because it allows me to be more grateful and then go and act on that gratitude.
Yeah, I often start my day off with gratitudes, but I'll finish my day with a reflection of how the day went. And which is kind of a gratitude in itself. All the good things that happen. I'm grateful that it doesn't take anything more than a regular Motrin for me to not be in pain this afternoon. And that it's been that way since I've had surgery. We can be grateful for a lot of things. And it's, again, what are you grateful for at the beginning of the day? What are you grateful for at the end of the day? Kind of reflect on how the day went. And, that can help in your overall well-being.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Excuse me. But yeah, making that list at the beginning of the day, I think, can help start you on a good foot. And I think, reflecting at the end of the day, what went well, what was a challenge, what was an obstacle, where was I an asshole? And how can I do, a little bit better tomorrow? I was taught, just try to be 1% better. And that doesn't mean that in 100 days, I'm going to be 100% better. I try to just be a little more kind, a little more caring, a little more understanding, a little more empathetic. And then I just try to put that into action. And I find that, by the end of the day, I am like 1% better. But then just like the 24 hours that I get to stay sober resets, the next day, so does the 100%. So I've added to the 100%, made it a new 100%. And then I try to do 1% better than that the next day. So it's an ever growing process for me. And it's something that it's not anything difficult. It's just simple stuff. It's saying hi to people. It's asking them how they're doing. It's please and thank you. It's holding doors. It's not littering. It's throwing your trash away. It's a whole lot of things. Putting your shopping cart back. I will die on that hill. And I just think that's an easy way to make somebody else's life a little bit easier. It's no sweat off my back to walk an extra 20 or 30 feet to put a cart away. And sometimes I'll even see, an elderly person, who is putting their groceries in their car, and I've waited for them to, finish packing the car, and I'll take their cart back for them too. I think there's just so much negativity sometimes, out in the world that becomes kind of distracting that it's really nice to just do a nice thing for somebody without expecting anything in return. That joy of giving. I find it's very helpful and, can help shape my day. And if I'm having a rough day, going out and doing something nice for somebody, really does sort of reset where I'm at in my head.
I liked your comment about, the 1% better. I took a class on change management a few years back, and, they talked about how if you set your goal at, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in the next month, well, you're not going to get there. If you decide that I'm going to now go from lifting 200 pounds to lifting 300 pounds, you're not going to get there by setting your goal that way. But if you set it at, okay, I'm going to do 1% or 10% better within the next month, well, okay, then now you've got something to reach for. And it's the same way with your recovery. You can't go into your recovery thinking, okay, I'm never going to drink again, because that's setting a goal that you might not be able to reach. But if your goal is to make it through today, then you've got a pretty good chance of making it through today, and tomorrow we'll tackle that.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea of the one day at a time. I think the world record for sobriety is 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times people get so wrapped up in, days and weeks and months and years that they forget to, enjoy and get the most out of this day. And that idea of setting, realistic goals, you talked about, losing 50 pounds in a month. I could surely stand to lose a few pounds. But rather than setting unrealistic expectations for myself, where I'm going to get up at 4:00 every day and go to the gym, and I'm going to, only eat, X, Y, and Z foods.
One less cheeseburger today.
One less. Did I have it? I did not have any cheeseburgers today. I had Salisbury steak, and it was very good. Thank you, April. But I can make realistic changes. I can cut out things like, junk food and chips and crackers and cookies, and I can stay away from fast food. I can stay away from, gluttonous behavior and sloth-like behavior. I can go for a walk. I can do a lot of things, today that will make me feel a little bit better tomorrow. Paul touched on, some self-care. I like to go get massages. I like to go to the chiropractor. And I find that those things, really do help me feel physically better. And then, going to the gym is something that I've gotten away from recently, and I'm really hoping to get back to it, because I did feel better after I left the gym, kind of in the same, way that I feel better after I leave a meeting. So sometimes it's just making these small, realistic changes that I can stick to. And I was talking to my therapist, and we were talking about some stuff, and she told me, she said, well, you've got character and integrity now, and you've got maturity and responsibility. And I said, that doesn't sound right. But as I look back on it, I can do the things I say I'm going to do, and I can not do the things I say I'm not going to do. I want to be somebody who is reliable and, sticks to their word and can finish something they start. And, that's all about setting those realistic goals. A lot of people do daily, weekly, monthly, yearly goals. Some people set, 3, 6, 9, 12 month goals. And I think that's a better way to break it up, rather than I'm going to get, all of this done in the next, 20 minutes. So, making sure that you're making the most of your time, is another way to, enhance your sobriety, enhance your recovery. And I think that's a big thing that I don't know if it gets left out or it's just kind of assumed, but I think it's important to talk about that stuff too, because, those little changes really do add up and make big changes down the road.
Well, we've got a hockey game on in the background, and before my Tourette's kicks in, I think we might want to wrap for today. We covered a lot of subjects today, but it's been good.
Yeah, we appreciate everybody that's been listening and tuning in. I got a text message from a couple friends of mine who live down in Florida, and they texted and said that they've been listening and they like what we're doing. And so we appreciate everybody out there that's given this a listen, given this a chance, and hopefully we're able to help some people. So,
yeah, and get the word out.
Yeah, please do. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks. Bye. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization. This content is for informational purposes only and is not intended for professional advice. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Until next time.